Okay, well, good morning. Welcome to our latest debate on the buyer. Today we're heading down to Australia, to South Australia, and to look at premium Australia as a whole, but also with a big focus on Coonawarra region, thanks to our partners today, Wynns and Treasury Wine Estates. And very pleased to have a great panel of sommeliers with us this morning to talk through their thoughts on premium Australia and what opportunities there may well be to explore a region such as Coonawarra. So in no particular order, if I could introduce Johnny Kleeman, he's the head sommelier at the Restaurant Story. So nice to see you, sir. You well?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, good to have you. Sonal Clare is award-winning sommelier, and you're now at the Wilderness Restaurant in Birmingham.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today, Rich. So it's a rock and roll fine dining restaurant up in Birmingham. So yeah, it's called the Wilderness.
Good man. And also very pleased to have Emma Denny, who's the assistant head sommelier at the Clove Club. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
And heading over to Guernsey, we have Lennart Sernlich, who's the manager of JB Parker's in Guernsey. And also joining us from Noble Lot, we have Enrico Marcolungo. So nice to have you on board, Enrico. And I understand you got a problem with your video, with your audio, but we'll hopefully come to you as we go along. And then thanks to Wynns, brand manager for Wynns, Sarah Featherstone. Nice to have you, Sarah.
Morning.
Nice to see you. And Shauna Carroll, who's the business manager for the on-trade for Treasury Wine Estates.
Nice to meet you all.
Morning, Shauna. All right, excellent. Okay. Well, I thought to kick off, if I can come to the various sommeliers just to get your initial impressions, and perhaps if you could just sort of give a little bit of background to yourself, also the restaurants that you work in, and then what your sort of thoughts are on premium Australia and where it might fit into your range. So Sonal, can I come to you? You mentioned obviously your restaurant in Birmingham. Do you want to talk us through yourself, the restaurant, and what you think of premium Australia?
Yes, I mean, we've got about 100 wines on our list. Kind of a bit of a focus on the more kind of conventional style of wine. So I'll kind of stick to a bit more of the kind of classic range. Although the music's quite modern, the kind of venue is quite rock and roll. There is almost an emphasis of people expecting to have like those more kind of minimal intervention, natural styles. It's not really my kind of gig personally. However, yes, we've got some really, really good Australian wines that we work with. We've got about 7 different suppliers. So, I mean, yeah, I think we try to kind of have a really good focus on international wines, although obviously the classic regions like France, Italy, Spain, and it kind of sits really, really nicely. I mean, I think lots of people kind of have an idea of Australian wines, what they expect, what they enjoy drinking. And I think it's just for us to kind of have that kind of selection available for them to kind of choose from, you know?
Yeah, and within that sort of Australia, what kind of price points do you find works best?
So I mean, our wine list starts from about 45 pounds a bottle, up to about 350 quid. I mean, Australian wines sit between 60 and 100 pounds. So we've got some Torbreck, Lewin Estate, got some Pewsey Vale on recently. So yeah, quite a few. But I've worked with many Australian wines in the past as well. So.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good, pretty punchy price points to be working with. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just nice to kind of showcase. Obviously, you know, when we kind of see Australian wines, there's always that idea when a consumer, or I guess, goes into a supermarket or something and always sees the price range being very accessible. Yeah. It's like, well, it almost kind of devalues what some of the kind of quality producers that are making some great stuff out there is about, you know?
Yeah. Excellent. Johnny, can I come to you and yourself and the Restaurant Story?
Yeah, so Restaurant Story, obviously we're a small amount of tables, 10 tables currently, though we're closing soon to build a second floor, so we'll be adding a few more spots to the restaurant soon. Along with that, also increasing the wine list. We sit about 350 bins at the moment. We'll be adding about another 100 to 200 is the plan when we reopen. So generally pretty good size, so we will kind of encompass as much as we can. Australia probably again sits that sort of entry level, premium level for us. So you were getting between sort of 70 to what, 120, 130 pounds. The wines we have on at the moment, probably focusing slightly more on high quality but smaller producers. So things like Castagna, so we have, or Bird in the Wire. So again, yeah, so the sort of more modern takes on Australian wines, probably more than the classical. You know, 100% Sangiovese or Nebbiolos. We're going to be bringing on some of the more lighter, more modern Grenaches as well. So it definitely sits in that. Also due to our style of food, we tend to do more fine and more elegant wines work better in general. Going for the big, heavy, chunky wines doesn't fit in with a lot of what we cook or what we do, especially for the tasting menu, which, you know, pairings dominates a lot of what we do. It's all tasting menu. So, but we have used quite a few Australian wines on that as well.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, and in your previous life, I know you obviously you've worked in a number of places. You've had your own wine merchants and stuff. Is that an area where you, in a way, where you are now, you've got a bigger platform to play with in terms of Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had it everywhere I've worked. Again, probably I've always lent a bit more into that more unusual modern Australian personally, just because I think I do that with New World in general, because I think I like to show that there's a lot of other great varieties out there besides Cab and Pinot and Chardonnay.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are still those sort of more it's still good to have some of those classic big names on there as well. Obviously, I've worked at places like the Ritz, so I've worked with all the big Penfolds, everything else as well.
Okay.
So yeah, I've had my good experience of all the best from Australia, I feel.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, we'll come back and explore a little bit more about, you know, where you go with regionality. But Emma, can I ask you in terms of the Clove Club and yourself and where Premium Australia might sit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, our menu food-wise is quite classic. We like to keep our wine list a good kind of mix of classical European wines with quite a bit of New World wines thrown in there. Me being from New Zealand, I love to try and represent wines from kind of the Southern Hemisphere. We have, I think, quite a nice selection of Australian wines. We probably have about 50 to 60 different bins over both white and red. And on kind of red wines, we probably have more red than we do white Australian wines at the moment. The kind of sweet spot really is around the kind of 120 to even up to 150 pound kind of price of what we're selling. We're finding a lot of guests actually are very willing to try Australian wines, even if it was something that they weren't looking for, especially if they can get more value there rather than at perhaps the French wines that they were looking at. We've had some Wynns wines on the list. We were doing actually the 93 John Riddick by the glass when I started at the club, which went down a treat. And it saved someone a small taste, they would always take a glass. It was very popular. But I think there's definitely a lot of interest at the moment from guests wanting to explore new regions, especially in places like Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand. Just trying to look for kind of value wines, but still at kind of that 150 pound price point, but stuff that's drinking really well.
Yeah, well, that's interesting actually that you're all sort of talking about really quite healthy price positioning. So, Lennart, can I ask you in terms of where Australia sits with yourself, and perhaps explain a little bit about JB Parker's as well?
Yeah, so JB's it's a kind of a small restaurant. We can do 50, 60 covers, something like that. But we got a pretty decent wine list for Guernsey. So the biggest challenge in Guernsey really is that there's a lot of money here, but people like to keep it in their pockets. So they don't generally spend a lot on wine. So that was kind of the challenge why I came over, and I wanted to change that, and it's been going well so far. So my point, I've got actually on a 250 bin wine list, I got 8 Australians total. So not massive, but I think for how closed in terms of experimentation people are here, that's pretty decent. In terms of price points, we are much cheaper on Guernsey than you guys over there in London. Well, in UK in general, there's no tax here, so that helps quite a bit. And the margins are much lower because most of the people that have restaurants here, they own the property, so we don't have to make as crazy margins. So we'll go only as high as like 60% or something, which I think it's unheard of in the UK. But yeah, we got some competition for Wynns. We got Van Leeuws, we got Yalumba, the cigar. So there's some interesting stuff there. But I've always been a fan of Wynns, so
Yeah.
we might
So-
find some space for it.
So in a way, are they more interested in the perhaps the more classier styles like Cabernet Sauvignon and Shiraz? Is that
Yes, but they would be generally interested in kind of lower entry-level stuff, which I choose to ignore.
okay?
Basically, no, it's just there's a lot of bad feelings towards Australia because a lot of the wines that are accessible to people are entry-level, and they can kind of destroy your confidence into the whole country. So my approach has always been when people are kind of not very confident in a particular country, I try to present good wines at a perhaps a little bit more premium. So my cheapest is £46, something like this, which for us is expensive. And then
So
we go all the way up to the two hands, which is like 180 for the Aries.
Okay, all right. Okay, interesting. Enrico, are you able to unmute yourself, or is your audio not working? You can shake your head if not, or
Sorry, yeah, can you hear me now?
you can. Excellent. Well,
All right,
nice to have you on board. Thank you.
Sorry, apologies, everyone. Had to change the device and finally got it. Hi everyone. I don't know if that was introduced before. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. I'm managing at the moment. I'm managing Shrine to the Vine, which is a wine shop. It's the retail branch of Killeen Andrew. So the team behind Noble Road wine bar and restaurants, and we tend to focus on a variety, I would say, of regions and styles, but mostly old world wines. So new world wines is always sort of niche for us, and therefore whatever we decide to have on the shelf has to be sort of very, very, even more say thoroughly thought and selected. Our kind of customers tend to come to find something different, either in terms of producers. So we tend to focus a lot on artisanal scale producers. There's a mix of classics and more kind of up and coming natural wines as well. Let's say in general, we have a focus on sustainability as well.
Mm-hmm.
So not necessarily we don't seek certifications, but say we really value a more kind of hands-off approach in the winery especially, and a respectful approach in the vineyard as much as possible. Perhaps what we try to do, which is maybe a bit different from other retailers, is to give people options which are drinking well now. So a little bit like in a restaurant, we try to have as much as possible back vintages, especially when it comes to wines that need aging. Therefore, we tend to use quite a variety of different sources and suppliers to be able to achieve that. Price point wise, is very varied, I would say, and keeps changing. So it can be anything from 30-40 pounds on the shelf to 100, 150 or more if there's an interesting wine with some age, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
And within Premium Australia itself, what's your thoughts there, be it with the shop or just generally?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely room for premium Australian wines. At the moment, I guess, because we are focusing on perhaps less classic examples, I would say it's a bit mixed. Mm-hmm. So we try to have both things that can surprise customers and not necessarily represent what has been done so far, generally speaking, at least, but also some classics as well. So to make an example, we had some Penfolds, Cabernet Sauvignon from the 80s recently on the shelf, so that sort of things.
Okay, great. Well, I suppose part of this morning really is to give you a chance to actually taste some perhaps more classical styles as well. So so if I perhaps turn the focus now back onto Wynns and Treasury. Sarah, do you want to just perhaps introduce, for those who don't necessarily know Wynns very well, could you perhaps give your thoughts on Wynns and where some of their history and obviously their position in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those, I'm sure everyone's know with introductions, I'm Sarah Featherstone, brand manager for Wynns that looks after the EMEA territory. So what I'll do, I'll just take you through some top line details around Wynns itself, but please just ask questions if you have anything. I'm sure many of you actually already be familiar with Wynns already, as we've kind of already discussed, but you may not actually know it was established back in 1891. So we talk a lot about Australia being New World, but we certainly know that there is definitely a lot of old vines, particularly around the kind of Coonawarra region. Now, it's a famous 3 tripled gable winery, which was actually created in probably 5 years later. So it's roughly around 1896 did actually the winery kind of get built, and that became basically the home of the winemaking and also the selling and all of the production side of things as well. And then later, the Sidings was actually built, which is one of our wines, actually, kind of one of our famously named wines. And the Siding was actually a railway, which was situated roughly about 5 minutes walk from the winery itself is today. And that was really just to help with kind of logistics and transportation with kind of bringing grape and produce and so on stuff in and out of the winery itself. But it was actually 1 year after that 3 triple gable winery was built, did we actually launch our first vintage. So that was in 1897 by this point. So again, we talk a lot about New World, but there's definitely a lot of kind of history, particularly around the Coonawarra region. Now, Wynns kind of ebbed and flowed, particularly around that region. And, you know, we talk about John Riddick. So he was a Scottish pioneer that actually founded the region and planted those vines. But it wasn't actually until roughly 1951 did Samuel and David Wynns, so a couple of restaurateurs and entrepreneurs, who kind of recognized some of the quality of the wines themselves. So they had identified the richness and kind of the intensity of the fruit characteristics. So they were really kind of inspired by the region. And it was them who actually renamed the winery itself to, as we know it today, so that's Wynns Coonawarra Estate. And yeah, just to mention again, so that was back in 1951. So we've jumped quite a few years at this point. What they really wanted to do is kind of set Coonawarra up as a place that was really recognized for the intrinsic qualities of, you know, of the properties of the vineyards itself, but also make sure that gables became recognized as a symbol of the kind of that heritage and that refinement, particularly on Coonawarra and around the winery itself. So I know that many of you will obviously know Coonawarra, but I'll go a little bit over the region. So as we know, it's in southeastern Australia and it's quite close to the coastline. So it's roughly about 80 kilometers inland. So although that may sound like a big number, it's relatively flat. So you get some really nice kind of cool breezes coming in there. It's sat on a low limestone dune. And obviously it's quite that maritime climate that we can kind of expect there. So again, quite cool, a lot of ripeness, a lot of acidity coming through in the grapes and long ripening seasons. But what makes Coonawarra particularly important for us, our winemakers, the style, and also really showcasing their regional characteristic is all about that terra rossa soil. Now, Wynns Coonawarra in particular has got roughly a 20 kilometer, well, the terra rossa that stretches through Coonawarra is roughly 20 kilometers in length. And it's kind of, we talk about it being like a cigar shape. Wynns actually, although we don't talk about this too heavily, occupies roughly about 80% of that soil type. So, and it's something that we celebrate quite a lot because it adds a lot of richness, texture to the grapes themselves, and it definitely gives a lot more of this kind of elegant expression, which our winemakers, you know, love to work with time and time again. So just some of those kind of key things talking about there is that really the winemaking philosophy around Wynns, and probably what you'll see through the wines today, is that it's really a celebration, and we really like to honor that kind of distinct regional characteristic because it's very different from other parts that you will see in southeastern Australia. I think there is a tendency I tend to experience that when people talk about Australia, it's very much bucketed as a one kind of style, one kind of profile type of wine. And it's not really until you get in those nuances of those different regions that you start to actually kind of get that different expression coming out of those different regions. You know, we celebrate and we hero our cabs particularly. We also do have some, you know, exceptional Shiraz as well, but stylistically, they're so incredibly different from the likes of what you're going to get from the Barossa Valley, for example. Something that I am actually really interested in learning about today from, you know, from this discussion from all of you is that really it's kind of like an opportunity for us to really kind of talk and educate around Coonawarra, because I don't think many people necessarily know that, you know, there are those differences, particularly in southeastern Australia. Understanding really what are those barriers for premium wine out of Australia. You know, we've discussed some price points. We've discussed that generally speaking, the you know, New World wines take up a small proportion of wine lists. So kind of what are the barriers there? Particularly, what do we think the barriers could be for the likes of Coonawarra, which is, you know, a very small region within southeastern Australia in particular? And then what do we also think is the future? So what's the future for the New World, for Australia in particular? Is there any kind of room to play for Coonawarra within the on-trade itself? So those are just kind of the top line things about both about the history of Wynns and also why I'm so excited to actually hear this discussion and hear this debate today.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Well, we'll pick up on those. I'll raise those questions as you put them through. Before we go into Coonawarra specifically, Sean, do you want to just talk through from your position within Treasury, and obviously, you know, from your position with the on-trade and where Wynns sits in with the kind of the on-trade portfolio that you have, or the approach you have for the on-trade?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, Wynns, I mean, as Sarah mentioned previously, you know, Wynns is certainly seen as an Australian classic. It's a wine that a lot of people, especially within the trade, are very familiar with. But it's probably also, which is, you know, to be fair, probably our fault in many respects. It's a wine that's maybe come and gone a little bit from the UK on trade. But we have got a real focus on this wine now. That's really, for me, the important thing, especially with some of the higher end wines that we're going to be looking at today. And it's really encouraging to hear some of the feedback from you guys about some of the price points where you see Australia and premium Australia being, because a number of these wines fit really well into that. How we're looking to work it, because we haven't got the biggest sales team in the world. There's only a few of us in the on-trade, and obviously we're looking to grow that all the time and that increase. And Wynns is a key part of that, and we're seeing that really fitting within the premium sector. Hence, you know, where this discussion today is really, really important. The wines that we're trying today are all listed with Noira, and we're looking to work with Noira as a kind of key partner with Wynns for the UK on trade, because they have that reach, they have that ability. We're not set up to do smaller drops to multiple places, but they are, and obviously they've got some contacts with some great businesses already as well. So that's kind of where we're sitting. And the wines that we're trying today kind of range from the Kunawara Shiraz that we'll try first is about £10 or £11 trade price, going up to the John Riddick, which is about £70. So that's kind of the range that we're looking at. But I think reflecting on some of the observations that you guys have shared with us so far, and one thing that comes out, and one thing that hopefully you'll see from trying the wines today, is that conversation around value. I mean, I know the wines aren't necessarily cheap, they're not entry-level wines, certainly as we start to go up the tiers, but I feel they really do over-deliver in terms of quality and actually the heritage and prestige that these wines have got. You know, Andrew Callard describes John Riddick as an Australian first growth. He puts it, you know, on a tier with Grange and similar kind of wines like that. But actually, price point wise, it's nowhere near. So it's really a great place to find some value for your consumers.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm gonna keep off tasting the wine just for a moment. I just thought I'd just get the buyers' thoughts on regional Australia and Coonawarra in particular. I mean, Johnny, when you're talking there about being able to sell wines at a reasonably high price, I mean, what's your thoughts on Coonawarra as a region? And does it, when you hear Coonawarra, do you immediately think A, B, C, D, or is it part of an Australia regional story that you're interested in?
I think Coonawarra I've always known about for a very long time early in my career, so I always think of it as quite separate, basically because of the Terra Rossa soil. It has a very sort of distinctive terroir. I think it always doesn't immediately make you think of Cab. It is always kind of synonymous with Cabernet Sauvignon. I think the probably only difference, and probably maybe a slight weakness of the area in the sense of why, from my early career knowing about it quite well to not seeing so much of it anymore, is again, I think a lot of exciting things have happened in Australia in things like Mornington Peninsula, parts of Victoria, these sort of newer areas that have probably taken a little bit of the focus, which isn't a negative on Coonawarra, but I think maybe that's where it kind of has already expanded to the point it is, and there's not been anything that it's still ticking along doing what it's been doing for a long time and improving, but it hasn't necessarily done anything new that's caught the eye, and Sminnays are just as bad as other people. We like new and shiny, or we like different or special. So I think that can sometimes be a bit of an issue as well. So I think that, but you definitely always think of it as a separate terroir. It's got its very much own distinctive style. And I think most sommeliers, at least I hope, would know that off the top of their head and recognise that.
Yeah, and as you say, I guess part of Australia's profile over the last 10 years or so has been to push as many of its regions as it can. So I suppose, which is great for Australia as a whole, but it might, each region has to make sure it's keeping up with its share of voice, I suppose.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think just more, if you talk about, what has been talked about more probably in the UK has been those sort of more emerging regions. So it's just more probably what's had a bit more fire under it in that sense.
Yeah.
And maybe Kunawara's it's lost a bit of love from maybe Australia itself pushing it.
Yeah.
And I think also that you look at what is popular within the UK in sense of drinking scene at the moment, at least in London, Burgundy does dominate. It is sort of talked about thing for sort of fine wine, and so wines that compared to Burgundian style wines tend to do better. That's why things like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc or sort of Oregon or regions like this start to do really, really well, I think, in the on-trade at the moment, because they are other options to that style that people are looking for. And for Australia, it's Grenache. There's a lot of more finer, lighter Grenaches that are becoming very popular as well. But you're talking again high-end scene, not actually the wider market.
Yeah. So, Noel, can I ask you in terms of what Kunawara, what that means to you, and your thoughts on where Kunawara should position itself in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, John was 100% is obviously got that unique selling point about talking about the Terra Rossa soils, and I suppose it's probably one of those stories that passing on to the guests is probably quite an important kind of factor. One of the wines that I first worked with was Catnock Estate, probably about 10 years ago. So we actually had their Merlot and Chardonnay. So we were selling that from 1998, and it was 2011, 2012 we're serving it. And it was amazing because you're kind of thinking, hold on a second, this can be a blockbuster red wine, full on, but it was really meticulously made, really quite soft, quite elegant. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes when you're a consumer, they automatically kind of think you're drinking full on heavy full body styles of red wine where they're pushing at 14.5%, I think it's just that kind of education a little bit more to kind of inform them that actually there is so much more available. You're talking about, right, you've got Margaret River, Adelaide, Eden Valley, but actually where can we kind of position the Coonawarra in the market, and pass that story on to them?
Yeah. Okay. And then do you have any Coonawarra on your list at the moment?
No.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. I suppose it's different. I'm in Birmingham, my centre of the universe, so it's a little bit hard, I suppose, with the team to kind of get up and visit us, Yeah,
yeah. Actually, has anybody here been to Coonawarra on the call? Anyone?
Are we going to ask if anyone's been to Birmingham?
Got to say no. That's a good shout. Yeah, well done.
It is quite interesting about Coonawarra's location when you talk to particularly the winemakers at Wynns. So you've got Sarah Pigeon and Sue Hodder, and they refer to Coonawarra as it's a destination spot for wine enthusiasts. He said, like you would seek out a restaurant, you seek out Coonawarra. You have to go if you're a wine enthusiast. Otherwise, you can't really stumble upon it. It's going to take you a while to get there.
Yeah, it's a trouble with Australia, full stop, really, isn't it? But Emma, what's your thoughts on Coonawarra when in terms of where it sits within Australia as a whole?
I think it's very much like a classic Australian wine region. I think at least a lot of the wines I've seen here in London over the past few years has been more the new, flashy, funky styles of Australian wines, perhaps coming from, as people have said already, like Mornington Peninsula, or stuff in coming from more Victoria. But I think it's something that it's solid and it's reliable. For me, I look at it as kind of like in France, you have the fun regions, like the kind of new things people like Jura. Even though I know it's not new, but there's always like Bordeaux is that classical style that sometimes people may think is boring, but it's always, not always, but like it's, you know what you're getting, it's quality, it's stable. And for me, Coonawarra is kind of like that, except I think it's a little bit more delicious than perhaps Bordeaux. I think because you think Cabernet Sauvignon when you think of Coonawarra. I know for us it sits quite well on our list. We have, at the moment, we have only two because we've sold out of a few things, but we do have one of the John Riddicks and we have the Parker First Growth as well. They sell kind of well. Sometimes it's a little bit more in sale if someone's looking for a Cabernet Sauvignon to kind of push them towards that rather than European styles. Or if people are looking in Australia, they see with like some like fun stuff like Timo Maya or Coda Barrels, and we're like, yes, but like this is classic. Like, you know, this is really a very special wine from Australia, as you said, considered one of the first growths, especially the John Riddicks of Australia. But I think it has quite a good reputation, even here in London. I look at it, Coonawarra, as a region as quality quite often, especially the stuff you kind of see being sold in restaurants.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Lennart, what was your thoughts on Kunawara?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think there's two conversations to be had. Number one is, yes, it sells because we're pushing it as sommeliers and we can sell it. But as a region on its own, as in guests just seeking it out, I don't think it has enough traction yet. And I think that's true for most of New World countries, that the appellations, if you will, need to have a little bit more love, need a little bit more attention. I think like there's nothing like Kunawara Cab anywhere in the world. It is unique. You can pick it out on the nose, you know, even without tasting it. There is nothing like a Salta Malbec. There is nothing like Inn Valley Riesling, let's say. But it's not being marketed in that way, the same as, you know, the old world does with your Sancerres, your Burgundies, whatever. So I think that's something that needs to be done a little bit better, where when wines are as unique as these are, the appellation, the region should be marketed better, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating you say that, because that's I think the focus on it's so hard for different regions to, as you say, to get that kind of share of voice of what they stand for. But the fact that you picking out just on the nose, that's quite a distinctive difference from perhaps from Cabernet's benchmarking against other places. Enrique, can I ask you in terms of your thoughts on Kunawara? And
yeah, pretty much I agree with everyone so far. I agree on the fact that Kunawara has a very well-defined identity, and it's very recognizable. In a way, is a classic. So all like strong points to me. What perhaps I see, and I agree with I think Jonathan and Emma, is that perhaps now other styles are more trendy. So there's a focus on a more Burgundian mouthfeel and flavor profile, or on Jura examples, more kind of, I think those regions and styles are a bit more trendy, perhaps, especially among younger consumers, I would say.
Yeah.
And, you know, people in their early 30s now are started to spend more, and they, I think, they form their palette on what's trendy now rather than on the classics. So perhaps more on Jura and Burgundy than on Bordeaux for Kunawara. Having said so, I think there's a great potential in terms of, because of the precise and well-defined identity of Kunawara. I think there's a strong potential in that, because now the conversation is all about terroir, it's all about having a sense of place. And if you can, I think, fine-tune that argument onto Kunawara, I think that becomes a really, really strong point, selling point at least.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, well, let's open some of these bottles that are in front of us. Keep you hanging on for too much longer. Sean, are you going to, Sarah, or Sean, are you going to take us through the wines, or do you want to?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, no problem. I mean, I really great to hear your feedback and some of the points of view there, and I think, you know, totally get where you're coming from, and I think to Emma's point, you know, this wine definitely is a classic. It's not and never going to be something, you know, new and exciting and shiny, unfortunately, as much as we all love that kind of thing as well. But I think there's definitely a place for those kind of classic wines here, and I think hopefully what we'll see from trying these wines today, and one of the things that always stands out for me, and Sonal definitely called out as well with the Katnook wines, that I think surprises a lot of people, is the elegance and the delicate nature of a lot of the wines. I mean, the first one we're going to try, having said that, is the Kunawara Shiraz, which 2020 was quite a hot year, and a bit of a challenge in terms of the alcohol level. So it's surprisingly high in terms of the level of alcohol for this wine. It's normally kind of more to you kind of 13.5 and just above in terms of alcohol, but actually the residual sugar, the total acidity of all kind of very similar to the rest of the wines and maintained. So it's only really the alcohol that was impacted. And just a bit of detail around the Kunawara Shiraz in particular. I mean, its first vintage was 1952, and the vines for this wine range from 30 years up to 110 years. So there's a load of quite old vine wines in Kunawara, limited impact in terms of any phylloxera or what have you. And it is it's almost like, as Sarah mentioned before, it's almost like an island itself. It's kind of halfway between Adelaide and Melbourne in the middle of nowhere. It's about 380 kilometers south of Adelaide. So you've got that quite southern aspect to it. The cooling winds coming in off the Antarctic, even though it's about 80 kilometers away from the coast, they really do rush in because it's very, very flat there. And it really does help maintain that level of acidity throughout the wines. This wine's, as I said, it's about £11 trade price. Great for drinking now, should develop well for another good 7 years or so. I mean, I think in terms of style, you know, it's this, out of everything that we are going to try, it's probably a nod a bit closer to something like Barossa, because it's got that bit more richness, and it's possibly not typical of what we generally see from Shiraz, from Kunawara. But I think it's a really, really great, accessible, enjoyable wine. I was trying it this morning before coming on the call, and just knocked out by the quality that it is at this price point. But it would be great to hear your guys' thoughts on it.
Yeah, and this is more of your retail offer, I guess, is it?
So I mean, they're all available from Oenotria, and yeah, you know, a big focus from my perspective is about trying to get them going in the on trade, and doing as much as we can. This wine has got a few listings already within the on trade with Oenotria, but yeah, so it's this before we reached the agreement with Oenotria, this wine was already listed in Majestic.
Okay, so we mentioned Coonawarra as being very much Cabernet Sauvignon, and we're starting with the Shiraz, which obviously makes sense. Any thoughts on Shiraz in terms of a variety, and also coming from Coonawarra? Any thoughts of where Shiraz sits within that?
Probably just before everybody jumps in on that one, probably worth flagging as well. I'm sure a lot of you guys are aware, but it was something that I only discovered fairly recently in terms of Coonawarra, because if I talked about Coonawarra previously, I would immediately, as you guys mentioned, Terra Rossa soil, Cabernet Sauvignon, that's where you go to straight away, having a similar kind of climate to Bordeaux. That's where my mind would click straight into. But interestingly enough, when Sarah mentioned earlier, 1897, the first vines being planted, they were Shiraz. They weren't planting Cabernet initially. So Cabernet was a much, much later thing. And that kind of goes to show, just in terms of the icon wines, so we've got the Michael and the John Riddick that we're going to try today, but the Michael first vintage was 1952, but the first vintage for John Riddick was 1982.
Okay.
So there's definitely always been that perception that Shiraz does really well, and hopefully you'll see it with the wines we try today.
Okay. Well, obviously we can refer to the Michael when we get there. But any initial thoughts on Shiraz and Kunamora from anyone on the panel?
I mean, it's definitely a decent wine, I would say. But like kind of coming back to that, what we were saying earlier, that with the cab, you know its typicity, you know exactly where it's coming from. Whereas this is a Shiraz. I wouldn't say this is a Kunawara Shiraz. I wouldn't pick it out,
Yeah.
in a lineup, if that makes sense.
So,
I think-
any go on.
Sorry, Rich. I was going to say, I think it's got everything that you want from a Shiraz if you're talking about a New World style, you know. You've got those kind of classic eucalyptus flavors, the hints of licorice, the black fruit, really quite white, ripe and warm. Yeah, very, very pleasant. And I suppose it's one of those kind of wines at the price point you kind of expect to kind of have on the list as a kind of safer option, so to speak, as a New World Aussie Shiraz, less so much focus on the Coonawarra aspect, I suppose, as well.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Any other thoughts in terms of? I mean, I guess Coonawarra does have its two hats, Cabernet and Shiraz. But let's discuss Shiraz a bit more when we've tasted the Michael a bit later on, because obviously that's more at the kind of the premium, the far premium end. Do you want to take us through the second wine, Sean? The Gables, is it? I think the second.
Yeah, absolutely.
second on the list?
So the next wine that we'll try will be the Gables, and I think this is where you'll see more of that. Clearly, it's cab anyway, but more of that typical Coonawarra style as well, with the eucalyptus coming through, and again, lovely kind of tannins, great acidity that really shows with this wine, and yeah, really quite typical of the style. The Gables itself was actually designed and produced specifically and with a focus on the on-trade. So the idea behind it, some of the other wines that we'll try today might take a bit of time to open up and be ready to drink, but the idea is that this is very drinkable from a young age. This is only 2019, and that again will develop for 7 or so years, but that it's easier to match with a variety of different foods. It does have some of that freshness, that acidity, and maybe a lighter style than a lot of people would expect from Australia, just referring back to the cooler climate that we referenced before for Coonawarra.
Any thoughts on this particular Cabernet style?
I'll say it's very approachable, even being like a 2019. It's fresh, and it still has a bit of vibrancy. And as you were saying, being in that cooler region, it has a little bit more leaner style, but it's still like, it's not tough. The tannins aren't too astringent. It's super approachable, and I think like a really kind of good look into kind of where Kunawara kind of wines can start. And like, this is kind of the beginning of what a Kunawara Cab Sauv should be like. I think it's great.
So just for reference, this is about £18 trade price. I mean, these are the list pricing. So clearly the actual price that you guys would see would be a little bit lower than that, but it's a rough guide of where it is.
We see both the first two wines as well, though, is they do, if you're talking just about Australia in general, they feel more on the savoury side. They don't feel like a typical, like, at least in your head, you start thinking Australia, more classic wines, you're thinking fruit, fruit dominant, and both of them show a little bit more in that savoury quality, a little bit more sort of leaner in that style.
Yeah. I think someone's got some music playing back in the background there. Is that back? Which is always good to have. Enrico, any thoughts in terms of where these match up to all your expectations?
I kind of agree with everyone has said so far. I think they're both showing a varietal character, and I would probably locate them in Australia. I find them both quite solid, quite I would say quite classically styled. I can see how both price point and style could work with quite a large share of customers, so in general. And I think they both express a sort of reliable, and I guess they both really delivers for the price point. Yeah.
Can I ask just a general question? When you're able to push people into some of the £100 plus price points, what are the kind of the key factors that a customer is looking for? Are they generally interested in you talking about Coonawarra as a region specifically, or is it more around what you're able to talk about the actual wine itself? Where does the region actually sit in that kind of sales story or the wine story? Do you think? Sonal, can I ask you that? If it's what are the kind of the key criteria that you're using to help people perhaps move into higher levels?
I think it's probably getting and gaining the confidence of the guest, trying to say, well, hold on a second, I'm not here to mug you off. I want you to kind of spend your money and spend wisely, I mean, if you were to say, right, I can get you to spend another tenner, for example, I can guarantee you this is a better wine more in the style that you're looking for. I suppose it's one of those hard ones because, again, we're tasting menu focused. So again, lots of our kind of wines are organized on flights, and it's down to them when you kind of showcase the wine, and then you can tell them this story and pass it on, that they're actually intrigued and go, oh, actually, I've never tried wines from the Coonawarra before. I suppose maybe we have a few more guests who are not too much aware of wines and certain regions in Australia as much as they may be in London, for example. They might not be as well educated as such. So it's almost trying to engage them to understand and go, actually, you've got some really kind of unique soils, climates, where you're able to kind of understand that actually you're not having these full heavy extracted styles of reds, These are a little bit more accessible. You got we've got the second one, the Gables, which is a lot more kind of savory style. And just kind of give them, I suppose, a bit more of that confidence to say, actually, leave it in our hands for us to kind of invite you to come and try something a little bit more different,
Yeah, and I guess by having those flights kind of preordained, you're able to almost push people down a route that you feel that they're going to get the most out of your list as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Johnny, can I ask you that question? I mean, when you're talking to customers about, trying wines higher up the list, what are the kind of the key criteria that you think gets people's attention? Is it the region? Is it the soils? Is it the Terra Rossa? Is it, what is it? Or does it differ depending on which part of the world we're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. I think it's a little bit led by the guests in the sense of what are they after. If someone's describing a wine and you think it hits that perfectly, it's about you then convincing them, look, I think that with what you were describing, I've got a wine here, you may not know it or you may not understand the region, but this is going to do exactly what you want. And then that's, again, like he was saying before, it's about picking up that sort of confidence of the guest. And that normally happens from sort of first wine recommendations. I always try to make sure my first one's kind of hits the nail on the head, and after that you just better lead people down a path a bit better. But I always think that it can come from again, when I say the guest leading, sometimes you get guests coming in, I want to have something different. I normally drink Bordeaux. What can you recommend me instead? That's something I get a lot of, not necessarily Bordeaux, but different regions. I normally drink this. I won't drink this. I normally drink that. What would you do? Let's try something different. We get a lot of that now. A lot of people actually want to get out of their comfort zone. They say, but they actually still want to stay within it, but have something a different experience somewhere else. And that's sort of place where I think definitely something like this does fit in. If someone comes and goes, I normally drink Bordeaux, but I want to try something else, this is somewhere you can lead them down with a new experience. But it's not going to be so far out their wheelhouse that they're going to be sort of shocked. I think also when you get to the higher price point from New World wines in general, especially in Australia, you also can start talking about a bit of value. As we're already saying, you know, if the John Riddick is being compared to sort of the best wines in Australia, but is about a quarter of the price, if not less, then you start explaining to people they're going to get an experience that's much higher value than they normally would, or if they were spending that money in Bordeaux or in Napa, they'd have to spend a lot more to get that same experience. Even on a higher price wine, you can still sell value, and I think that's important as well.
Yeah, I guess there must be music to your ears as a sommelier when someone says, "Can you, you know, I like Bordeaux, but can you show me something different?" It must be fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's good when you get that trust from people. Again, I think we're in a bit of a fortunate position where I am at Story that people kind of come in here already assuming that it should be
Experiments.
So we get a little bit more leeway because of that, and because we are a blind tasting menu, they have no idea what they're eating. They're probably a little bit more inclined to be led.
Yeah. Emma, is it a similar story at Clove Club? And just asking people about what it is about, what are the key things that attract people to buy wine at a higher level, and would a region like Coonawarra be a factor, or would it be more try a Cabernet Sauvignon from the New World as opposed to an Old World?
I think it's definitely more kind of try a Cab Sav from New World rather than looking at Coonawarra specifically. I can't say I've ever had a guest specifically request actually in any restaurant I've worked at in London, request specifically a Coonawarra Cab Sav. But I've had people ask me for a Cab Sav or a red wine that is excellent value, really high quality, perhaps something that they haven't had before. And I think we're quite lucky at the Clove Club. Like, it is very much been kind of 2 Michelin stars, the kind of restaurant where people come for an experience, and so they're perhaps willing to pay a little bit more for a slightly better wine. So we're quite lucky in that regard. And I think quite often it is a little bit more of a hand sell. It's not something that's a guest opens a list and just automatically goes, oh yeah, Kunamora Cab Sav, I want that.
Yeah,
definitely something where we get involved and we kind of say the reasons why they should have it and why it is kind of really great value and really premium.
And I guess that's when you can bring in the whole aspects of the region and what makes the terroir so specific, you know, when you're having that kind of high level of conversation.
Yeah, definitely. That's why you got sommeliers.
Of course, yeah. Enrico, I mean, if you're working in the shop there, I mean, is it a lot of hand selling for you as well in terms of recommending people and allowing them to sort of try different areas?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, normally people come for recommendations. Can be even like, I just gone to the butcher's. What would you suggest with this cut of meat? Or I'm having these tonight. What would you suggest? But also, I would say the majority of the times is, as Emma was saying, or even and Jonathan as well. They say, "Oh, I normally like these. What would you recommend as an alternative?" So everything is pretty much a hand sell, I would say. I've rarely, or actually, I can't think of an example when the customer specifically asked for Kunawara Cabernet, for example. But it's one of those areas I would definitely think of if someone is into their Cabernet Sauvignon, for example. Especially because, of course, California, Napa, and Sonoma have become so expensive. In at least the good examples, I think potentially Kunawara could offer better value for money.
Yeah. And Lennart, your thoughts on that?
First of all, I'm jealous to everybody that you get to recommend so many interesting things. I don't get that privilege here. But yeah, in terms of higher price point, unfortunately, the Kunawara on its own does not sell itself. But it does help when kind of if I do get a chance to actually upsell it, people do like the the enthusiasm, because it is something unique, and I do like to talk about how unique it is, and the eucalyptus and the trees surrounding the vineyards and stuff like that. The fun thing was, when I started here, there was a wine called the Chocolate Box on the list. Yeah, it's great value, and people loved. I took it up, unfortunately. Sorry. People loved it. They kept ordering it. They said, "Oh, this is delicious. This is delicious. This is delicious." But nobody really knew that it's Coonawarra. Nobody knew that it's an Australian. Even they just knew it's a Cabernet Sauvignon that had the name Chocolate Box. So, just coming back to my previous point on in the previous section, it's just I think as a region, Kunawara needs to do more on their marketing. They need to develop this branding better. They need to make sure. They need to make sure that people do know Kunawara is something interesting. It is probably one of the most unique regions in Australia. There's not many that you will say that really, really stand out.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, should we carry on with the tasting then? Sean, do you want to take us through the next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I just interesting to reflect on the feedback there as well. Though I mean, I think some of what we've spoken about with these wines and being trusted and classic and reliable, which I think they are. You know that it's a fairly safe bet if you were to be recommending it to a customer. But I think maybe one of the great things that comes out of this is that, from what I'm hearing, is that it's got that comfort, but also if you're in the trade or if you're a really engaged wine consumer, you know about Coonawarra and you know about the detail of. But actually, for a lot of customers, it's got the potential to be something that people are discovering and that they're trying something new within that as well. So, but yeah, completely agree with the other side of it. Wynns specifically from our perspective, but Coonawarra in general does need to do more in terms of making people more aware of what it is all about, because there's some great wines. So we're just moving on to the black label now. So with the black label, this is where we're moving into the first kind of icon wine, as it were, in terms of Wynns. So this wine was one that James Halliday called out as the single most important Cabernet Sauvignon in Australia. So it's got that great heritage. First vintage was 1954. The fruit for this wine is taken from the top 20 to 25% of the fruit grown, all specifically on Terra Rossa soil. As Sarah mentioned earlier, the majority of our vineyards for Wynns are all on the Terra Rossa anyway. But everything that goes into the black label comes from, as I say, that top 20 to 25%, which makes it a really collectible wine. It's one of the most collectible wines in Australia. And yeah, I think it's just got that maybe a bit more boldness, a bit more power to the fruit than the Gables, but it's still got that lovely elegance and freshness that comes through.
And it's coming in below 14% alcohol as well.
Yeah, which really isn't unusual. I mean, that's why I referenced it earlier when we were talking about the Kunawara Estate Shiraz. It's unusual for it to be as punchy alcohol-wise from Wynns as the Kunawara Shiraz is. I mean, all of these wines are below 14%, and most vintages we do tend to be varying. So this is 13.8. The Michael's 13.8 as well, and the Riddick's 13.7. So they're not massively punchy in terms of the alcohol. The black label here, total acidity 6.4, residual sugar is only 9.4 grams. So they are quite refined wines, which I think surprises a number of people when they're expecting something that's that bit more punchy, and that probably reflects back to those similarities in terms of the climate to Bordeaux. I mean, it's drier and it's sunnier in Coonawarra than it is in Bordeaux, but the average temperature during the growing season is a couple of part degrees lower than Bordeaux. I think Bordeaux is 17.4 and Coonawarra is 17.2. So just there is that potential to maintain that freshness and acidity, which I think comes through with this one.
Yeah, quite hard to spit out, even at 11:10 in the morning. it's got that really lovely fresh acidity there, actually, isn't it? It's any thoughts on that wine from sommeliers?
Definitely very, very fresh. But I'd like to see it in about 3 years. I think it just needs a little bit longer than the one previous. I mean, right now, I'd prefer the Gables to drink today. But you can definitely tell this is it's better. It's got a better mid-range, better mid-tone palette. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I have to agree with Lennart. I definitely like to see kind of the development of this wine and see really like in 5 years how it looks, in 10 years how it looks, but you can really tell compared to the Gables that this is a step up. It's more serious. There is everything's just maybe it's a little bit more maybe refined or kind of polished, but I still think it's really young, but even young, it's you have that freshness. It's really beautiful.
Any other thoughts? We should go on to the Michael. Do you want to talk us through the Michael? Obviously, this is the higher level Shiraz that we try to, well, Shiraz we started at the beginning. Do you want to talk us through the Michael?
Yeah, sure, 100%. So, I mean, the first vintage of the Michael was 1952, and it was one of the first wines that the Wynns brothers looked to make. Reference back to the vines for the Coonawarra being 30 to 110 years old. The vines for the Michael are all 80 to 140 years old. So you've got some really seriously old vines there, which obviously makes for some really concentrated, really fantastic quality fruit. I mean, this is 2016, so still loads of potential for this to keep developing. It's probably still a little bit young at the moment, but I think it's, especially if you decant it, then the wine can shine really well with food now. But one that will just keep getting better and better. I mean, the recommended development period for this is up to 2036. The original, well, not the original vintage, but the 1955 vintage apparently is, I'm not lucky enough to have tried any, but apparently it's still showing really, really well now. So just kind of gives you a bit of that kind of indication of how long it can last. I mean, 2016 was a warmer year for Kunawara. There was really kind of good warm temperatures during flowering, so fruit set was good, which led to some green harvesting just to control the overall amount of the crop. But then towards the end of the season, the growing season, it cooled down quite significantly, which meant that the grapes just had that time on the vines to just develop, the levels of tannin and the complexity and the fruit definition for them. So, I mean, I think you can really see, for me, this wine's all about potential, ultimately, but still one that you can drink now. But it just shows what Shiraz can do in Coonawarra.
Can I just ask a question for Sean and Sarah? How much of the quality that we're trying today is down to you guys, to your winemaking? And do you find the same consistency kind of from the other producers in the region? Would you say that you're kind of on par? You can get Shiraz of this quality at this low alcohol. Can you get a Cabernet at this low alcohol, this type of freshness and so on from the other guys?
I mean, I would say that there's some really fantastic producers from Coonawarra, and we've mentioned some of them already. I think Wynns is definitely preeminent amongst the producers. I'm going to say that. I mean, I'm not going to say something too different from that. But from trying the wines, trying the quality, I think you really do see, and there is a real focus on. So it's an all-female winemaking team: Sarah Pidgeon and Sue Hodder. Sue's been there for nearly 30 years. I think it's 30 years next year, Sarah, is it?
This year, 30 years this year.
Yeah, and Sarah's been there for virtually as long. She's been there since 1998. So there is a real focus on the heritage and the history and the tradition, but within that, there was and there's always been a willingness and an acceptance of adapting to changing tastes and styles, using modern technology where it's appropriate as well to improve the quality of the wine. And going back to what we spoke about before, you know, Wynns was one of the first wineries in Coonawarra. So where that Terra Rossa soil is so important and such a narrow little strip of land, you know, most of our, I think 85% of our vineyard holding is all on that Kunawara Terra Rossa strip. And all of these, as I say, you know, all of these wines that benefit from that soil type are all sourced from there. You know, we make some Riesling and some Chardonnay and some other bits in the area, but they're kind of grown on the soils where it's less important. So I think, you know, Wynns obviously is a big part of that, but you get some great wines from some other well-known and reputable producers as well. But the area, I mean, the area itself isn't massive, but when you start to go outside of that, it's like most wine regions. Once you start to go out of that classic area that really delivers that quality, then the quality can be quite variable.
But is it the consensus that this is the style that you should all be going for as a region, as fellow producers?
I mean, I don't know that there's. I mean, Sarah knows the winemakers a lot closer than I do and talks to them more often than I do. So she might be able to know how pally they all are and if they all agree or not. But I'd imagine probably not knowing winemakers.
I'm not too sure if there's like a group consensus, but it is most certainly a tiny region. We're talking a population of roughly 130 people. So it's very small, it's very tight knit, and they all live amongst each other. Sometimes the viticulturalists can want to kind of work across different vineyards as well. They're not necessarily set to a specific vineyard. So there's probably definitely some similarities that they may share. But I suppose coming back to the point with, you know, how incredibly important that regional character is for us, and that also that vintage as well, what you kind of get out of the expression of that particular year. Michael and Riddick are actually wines that obviously Suhoda and Sarah Pigeon are incredibly passionate about, and if they don't quite hit the mark of that particular year, they won't launch them.
Right.
Whether or not that goes for the other wineries within Coonawarra, I can't comment, I don't know. But this is why these wines are particularly important to Wynns as a winery, to the winemakers in their skills, and, you know, as them as winemakers and them being at the helm of the winery itself. If it doesn't hit a mark that they want it to hit, it will not be released.
Okay. Brilliant. All right. Well, I'm aware of our time, and let's get to the last. Was the last one? The arguably the star of the show, the John Riddick. Do you want to taste that, and then we can have some final comments from the panel in terms of the wines? And do you want to? If you all have a go at the John Riddick, and Sean, if you want to put it in context.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to reference, as Sarah mentioned, the Riddick and the Michael are both only produced in the very best years. And we are very strict on that. The Michael, I probably should have mentioned, is produced only from the top 2% of fruit for Shiraz. And again, all Coonawarra Terra Rossa vineyards. Primarily, a lot of the Michael comes from the V&A Lane vineyard, which is rated as the best for Shiraz specifically. So with the Riddick, again, very, very small amounts from the very best vineyards, essentially all on Terra Rossa soil, only in the top quality years. So this is less than 1% of the top quality fruit is used to go to Riddick. And if the fruit's not considered good enough, then we just don't make it. And this really is it's powerful. You've got cassis, you've still got ripe, juicy fruit, mocha coming through, and lovely fine tannins. Just still that elegant backbone coming through with the wine. Recommended to age, up to 2046. So I think I mentioned earlier, it's 13.7% ABV, 6.3 total acidity, and 0.4 grams of residual sugar. So again, you've got that you've got that elegance and that freshness that comes through. This one's had 16 months in oak, 31% of that being new, and then a blend of hogsheads and barriques for the old oak on it that just kind of soften the wine. As I say, similar in terms of the Michael. I think decanted, this can be drunk now with food and match well with food at this age, but it will just keep getting better. We had the 2018 and the 2008 at the Aussie trade tasting a couple of weeks back, and Matthew Jukes came in, and I think the 2018 was one of the first wines he'd try, and he just said that's going to take some beating today. So he was just really impressed with the quality. He didn't want to try the 2008, but we had it kind of tucked under the counter and we're sharing it with people as we were going along. And again, just in terms of reference, as we said with the Michael, I think the wine at this age, it's all about that potential of where it's good now, but it's going to be great. And the 2008 was absolutely singing on that day, and just really showed how this wine develops so well, given a bit of time.
Good. Okay. So any thoughts on the last couple of wines from the panel, and just in terms of where the expectation level is, or what you think this really delivers? Sonal, can I ask you your thoughts on?
Sorry, yes. Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's got such lovely complexities, like the Mocco's 100%, like you've got that kind of chocolate, hazelnut flavors, well, almost a little bit savory and umami flavors as well. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, yeah, again, obviously it's one of those, if you want to kind of serve it today, for example, would you decant it and obviously be serving it with obviously prime steak or something like that? But I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of it. Yeah, really, really lovely. Thank you very much. Bit of a treat.
Emma, I know you said you like Wynns before the call. Is that what you're expecting?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I expected. Especially the John Riddick has this lovely concentration. Again, something I'd love to see, even though it already has just like a smidge of age in it, I'd love to see it kind of how it develops over the next few years. But I do agree, perhaps decant it if you want to drink it now, maybe leave it for an hour or so, let it really open up. But yeah, really beautiful. It has like this dark deepness to it, but it's not too heavy. It's still quite smooth, which is really beautiful. Yeah, really, really nice.
Connie, can I ask you?
I think you see this evolution of all the wines. They all have this kind of lovely fleshy tannin note to them. So the tannins are there, but they're very sort of meaty in a way. It carries that savory note through. I mean, you especially see that with John Riddick. Again, like everyone else, I'd love to see it with age, but I like to see everything with age. So that never changes for me. I'd be interested to know there is library stock if that ever happens and gets released. Because definitely, I think that when you talk about selling to the on trade, I think that finding age is a nightmare, but we all want to do it. We're all trying to get hold of wines that have age in our showing, and probably a little bit more at closer to their peak rather than their beginning of their life. But this has amazing potential. Both this and the Shiraz as well. The Shiraz as well is again shows a lot of sort of depth and complexity, and again that sort of lovely meaty, savoury tone running through it as well. Again, in my head, it's pairing options. There's a lot you can do with that.
Yeah, and there's obviously been a lot of talk about old vines, not just from Coonawarra, Australia, but just generally around the world. I mean, is old vines, do you think, something that resonates in terms of talking to consumers, or just in terms of yourself as well when you're looking at wines?
Definitely. I think, if you look at some people, that's what basket press is what they sell their entire thing on. I think that you see old vine written on labels. I mean, the Burgundy do it with Vigneault Vin. I think that is definitely something they talk about a lot, and something that I definitely talk about a lot on pairings. I've got quite a couple of different wines that have a Vigneault Vin on them, or the old vine. If it's a talking point, definitely.
Yeah. Enrico, can I ask you just your thoughts on your wines there, but also the old vine context?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to me, there's a clear step up with the last wine, and I really like especially the savory element. I find it a bit more tense, a bit more think that, yeah, probably the savory element takes away a bit of the sweetness of the fruit, which I particularly like on the palate, especially. And definitely it's time, I think, this wine in 10 plus years will be singing. Old wines, yes, definitely important. I think it's one of the most used, but also most effective marketing tools, perhaps, at the moment. And yeah, it definitely adds interest to the conversation when it comes to recommending wine. Also because I think it's not just about the quality, it's also about the fact that that specific vineyard has a history. And therefore you can connect that to many other things in the narrative, I would say.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. And we've got sort of 5 or 6 minutes left. I mean, Leonard, just some final thoughts from yourself in terms of what you thought of the session. And I know you mentioned before about what Kunawara could potentially do, but what's your general thoughts on where these wines might sit for you?
Yeah, look, they're very good wines. They're very expressive of what they're supposed to be. I actually have to say just about the John Riddick that it's the least typical of all of the ones that I've tried, but I think it will get more typical as it softens up. I think it just needs a little bit more time for that the eucalyptus, the menthol that we keep on talking about, to kind of shine through a little bit more. In terms of where they sit, yeah, definitely they have potential. I could easily sell them. Probably the Gables would be the one that would get the most volume, I think. I think it's a great quality wine for a decent price that can really move. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay. And Sonal, I've got some final thoughts from yourself, just in terms of the wines you tasted and your thoughts on Coonawarra.
Yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed them all, so I really appreciate it. I kind of prefer a bit more that kind of fruit style, fruit forward approach to wines, and yeah, I can completely understand what the guys are discussing about having the wines, kind of giving them a bit of time. I suppose one of those, I mean, if you're looking in Bordeaux and you're looking at Napa and you're drinking wines from 16s, 18s and 19s as well, it's like, well, I mean, if somebody needs to drink something and they're looking for that kind of style where it's quite full on. And again, these are still quite kind of elegant, you know, they're not kind of taking off your mouth with tannins or anything, are they? They're still really kind of elegantly balanced. And yeah, I think it's just really kind of nice kind of have an experience of trying them all and saying, well, actually, how can they kind of sit on a wine list and where will they command respect, you know?
Brilliant. Thank you. And Emma, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing to kind of try the whole range. To be honest, I've only really tried a few vintages of kind of John Riddick in the past. So for me, that's where like I knew Wynns, but really cool to see. I think something like the Gables is super approachable. And I think at the price point as well, work amazingly on the list. It'd be, I think, a really easy sell and a really way to get my guests and our consumers kind of into appreciating Kunawara styles of wine. I think all of them are fantastic. Even like the Black Label, I think for us could sit really nicely on our list as well, to put that maybe aside the John Riddicks to have kind of 2 options. Yeah, but it's been fantastic to try them all. I think there is, you do kind of really have the Michael and the John Riddicks, that really high end, that very premium style. But it's really nice to see kind of the lower end as well. It's a little bit more approachable on the price point, I think, for our guests and for consumers. And it's, yeah, been very cool to kind of see where they can kind of sit.
Excellent. And Enrico, can I ask you for your final thoughts?
I actually had the question, if I can.
Yeah, because we're running out of time, but go on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, it was just a pleasure to, of course, to join the meeting, and thank you everyone for arranging it. It was the first time for me to try the whole range, or say part of the range at least, this way, and it's been really, really, really interesting and great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, 11:30. I know that lots of you will have service to go to, so I just want to try and keep it as tight as we can. But obviously, you know, we can pick up on questions separately with the team at Wynns if you want to. And Jonathan, can I ask you what your final thoughts on the wines and the region?
I mean, I feel like it's a great refresh for me on Kunawara. It's something I've kind of discovered quite young in my career and haven't tried for a while. I think this is a great expression of. I definitely think sort of, again, we've all talked about it. I think seeing some of these with age on them is going to be a big difference for me. But I think that definitely seeing that savoury, meaty quality of it, I think is a big, in itself, a big sales difference between what you think of for Australia. And even from when we've been talking about these newer regions, we've been talking about freshness and elegance and sort of more Burgundian. But I think some of these show that more old world, savoury, comparable style that does work beautifully with sort of food pairing, rather than your sort of big Barossa, chunky, jammy fruit. So I do think there is a great distinguishing element to these as well.
Brilliant, excellent. Well, thanks for your comments. And Sean and Sarah, I'll leave the final words to you. Do you want to just perhaps sum up and give your final thoughts on what the sommeliers have said, Sarah?
I'll just butt in for a second. I'll leave the summary up to Sarah because she'll do it much better than me. But just because there's been referenced a few times in terms of older vintages, and just to flag, it's something that we are looking at with Noira, and conversations we've had with them, certainly for the Michael and the Riddick, of looking at trying to bring some over. So it's quite encouraging to hear that you guys feel that there would be a call for that. And yeah, certainly something that we're looking into. So we'll look to update you as best we can as we know more on that one.
Great, yeah. So thank you all just so much for your time. It's been really interesting for me to actually have, this conversation and to kind of speak directly to you about, where we actually see premium Australia and particularly Coonawarra. Heard it loud and clear that, we kind of feel like those back vintages are obviously incredibly important for some of, for the on-trade occasions. We know that especially for those premium tiers. So that's great that Sean is looking at that with the team. And yeah, I suppose from a marketing perspective, feels like I need to get onto Wine Australia. Get Coonawarra a bit, raise the profile a little bit. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I've really, really appreciated it. I've learned so much from you. So thank you.
Brilliant. All right. Okay. Excellent. Well, it's 11:30. What can I say? I'm spot on time. So thanks for all your time. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you all are, and fitting these sessions in is a lot harder to do than it used to. So thank you for everybody. Thanks. And hopefully we'll, well, who knows? Why not organise a press trip to Coonawarra?
Yeah.
We'll get down there and see it for ourselves. Okay. All right. Well, good morning. And thanks everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.